I didn't think I'd say this, but you might want to think twice before getting the Apple Watch Ultra 2, or maybe a better wording is that I'm personally conflicted about this watch. I've collected a lot of data with the Apple Watch Ultra 2 over the last 10 days, and what bothers me is that it doesn't seem to be any better and might even be worse in some cases than the Series 9, even at things that the Ultra 2 should theoretically be better at. But you can judge that yourself based on the data I will show in this video, and there's plenty of data to share. Specifically, we will be testing the heart rate tracking accuracy of the Ultra 2 on myself and on Theresa for a total of 42 workouts. And we'll test the sleep stage tracking performance with 5 nights of data. We'll be looking at the GPS tracking consistency using 18 bike rides. And we'll check the oxygen saturation measurements using 100 plus data points. Okay, let's get to it. Hello everyone, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. I've put the Ultra 2 through some rigorous testing and the results are super interesting. And to see if a big watch like the Ultra 2 also works on smaller wrists, I tested it on Theresa as well. Now, as you might have noticed, my reviews have gotten quite long recently, so I'll try to be a bit more concise, but I'll upload the full results to my website. But honestly, no promises since I might get carried away and make this a long review anyway. However, first some quick basics about the Ultra 2. How is the Ultra 2 different from the Ultra 1 and the Apple Watch Series 9? Well, let's first look at the upgrades compared to the previous generation. First of all, the screen is significantly brighter, now putting out a max brightness of 3000 nits compared to the 2000 nits of the Generation 1. Now, even though this is indeed noticeable in some situations when you hold them side by side, this will probably only occasionally make a significant difference in practice, but it's nice to have. Here you can see some footage side by side and you can judge if this matters to you. And as was highlighted during the launch event, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 now has the new S9 chip, which enables the double tap feature. Now, for those of you that haven't heard of the double tap yet, it's basically a way of controlling basic Apple Watch functionalities by pinching your fingers twice. Now, I haven't been able to test this since it hasn't been released yet, but people like DC Rainmaker have been able to test it and they say it works quite well. Finally, the Ultra 2 has Apple's second generation ultra wideband chip, which means you can now very precisely locate your lost iPhone using precision finding, giving you the exact distance to the phone. This is actually a valuable feature for me that I would use a lot since I often misplace things and I already use my AirTags quite a lot, so this is a nice addition. When it comes to voice inputs, there are also some upgrades. First of all, Siri can now process some commands on device for requests that do not need information from the internet, which now results in quicker and more reliable responses. And Siri will be able to access and add health and fitness data, but this feature still needs to be released. The dictation itself is also supposed to be about 25% more accurate. So that was a lot of information, but those are, in my opinion, the most important changes compared to Generation 1 of the Ultra, and they're honestly quite minor changes. I think it's actually more interesting to look at the difference between the Ultra 2 and the Apple Watch Series 9. Now, similar to a year ago when we compared the Ultra 1 to the Series 8, the Ultra 2 has much longer battery life than the Series 9. The Ultra 2 has a battery life of up to 36 hours, whereas the Series 9 has a battery life of up to 18 hours. This is for me the main benefit of the Ultra and the Ultra 2. I can forget to charge the smartwatch for one day and it will be fine. Luckily, both the Ultra 2 and the Series 9 have fast charging, with the Ultra 2 taking about 1 hour to charge up to 80%. What's far more important to me is the precision dual frequency GPS that the Ultra 2 has, which should be better than that of the Series 9. However, as you will see later in this review, there are some weird things going on there. Finally, as you know, the Ultra series is geared much more towards outdoor adventurous types, so there are all sorts of functionalities that make the Ultra 2 especially good for hiking, diving, marathons and more. However, you can easily find out more about those things on Apple's website, so I won't discuss them. Instead, let's get to the thing you've all been waiting for, the systematic testing of the Apple Watch Ultra 2. And as always, I want to start off with the heart rate tracking performance of the Ultra 2, which I tested on myself and on Theresa for a total of 7 indoor cycling sessions, 21 outdoor bike rides, 7 weightlifting sessions and 7 outdoor runs. Now, to test the performance, I'll compare the heart rate measurements of the Apple Watch Ultra against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. And we'll start by looking at one of the easiest types of exercises for a watch to track, cycling indoors. And here we can see an overview of that accuracy for the Ultra 2 on me. Now, each dot here is a single heart rate measurement with along the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Ultra 2. And we want the points to be as close to this blue line as possible. And we see something similar that we also saw for the Series 9, namely that in the higher heart rate range the agreement is almost perfect, or basically perfect I would say, and in the lower heart rate range it's very close to perfect, but there are a few more points away from the blue line. Now this means that in the lower heart rate range there's some more deviation. Still, the correlation, this R value, is 1.00, so almost perfect. The value cannot be higher than 1, so a rounded value of 1.00 is basically perfect. But let's take a look at one or two individual rides to see what's going on in the lower heart rate range. And here you can see the first example interval spinning session with along the horizontal axis the time and my heart rate along the vertical axis. In blue-green, I plotted my heart rate according to the polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red you can see my heart rate as recorded by the Ultra 2. And as you can see, there's generally a very good agreement between both devices. All of the peaks after my intervals were detected by the Apple Watch Ultra 2. There's just one small issue, and that is that in the lower heart rate ranges, when I have a quick dip in my heart rate, this isn't always fully detected by the Ultra. You can see that for instance right here, but also right here, here and here. So there are some quick deviations in the lower end of my heart rate, and this is not always detected by the Apple Watch Ultra. And this is why we saw in the lower heart rate range some more deviations in the overview. Still, overall this doesn't look bad. I'll show you one more example, this one right here, and here we see exactly the same thing. In the higher heart rate range there's an almost perfect agreement, only in the lower heart rate range when there's a quick dip in my heart rate does the Apple Watch Ultra struggle just a little bit. Still, these are minor deviations and we basically see the same thing for all spinning sessions. And here we have an overview plot similar to before, but now for Theresa. And as you can see, also for her, most points are on or close to the blue line, though in a few cases the Apple Watch Ultra detected a too high heart rate. The correlation is also slightly lower at 0.99, but still very close to perfect. But let's also take a quick look at her individual rides. So this is an example session for Theresa, and here we actually see a very good agreement between the polar H10 ECG chest strap and the Apple Watch Ultra. The biggest deviations are here in the beginning, again in the medium to low heart rate range, and in the higher heart rate range it looks very good, but this session looks very good in general. This second session shows a bit more deviation, and again this is mostly in the lower heart rate ranges, similar to what we saw for me. So we see that for instance right here and right here. There was only this quick dip in heart rate where there's a big deviation between the two, and I'm not sure if the polar H10 is at fault here and this is an actual mistake by the reference device, or if the Ultra had a mistake here. Still, generally this looks very good. That's looking really good. However, how does this compare to the Series 9 and other smartwatches? Well, let's find out. Let's put these results into context and compare the Apple Watch Ultra against almost 70 different watches I've previously tested. That way you can determine if the Ultra 2 is the watch for you. And that overview is displayed right here. Now the correlation value we were looking at before is the metric we will use for this, which is displayed along the horizontal axis, and we want that value to be as close to 1 as possible. And on the vertical axis I ordered the watches from worst to best. So the further to the right and the higher the device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And here I marked the Apple Watch Ultra 2 in red. And as you can see, it's really up there with the better performing watches, but we do need to zoom in a bit to actually read those labels. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the watches with a correlation of 0.9 or higher, so just some of the better performing watches. And even within the realm of better performing watches, all Apple Watches are doing amazing. You can see the Apple Watch Ultra Generation 2 right here, which is super close to the Generation 1. But what I do find interesting is that the Apple Watch Ultras are doing a tiny bit worse than the Apple Watch Series 9. Now, I'm not sure if this is a significant difference, but it does make some sense that the added weight of the Ultra 2 has some influence on the performance, though for cycling indoors this is probably minimal. All the top 8 of best performing watches are Apple Watches in this case, and all of them are good enough at tracking your heart rate for cycling indoors. Now, just looking a bit beyond Apple Watches, we see some Huawei watches are doing rather well, but also Galaxy watches are not too bad at all, and even the Google Pixel watch is doing quite okay. Next, let's take a look at cycling outside, which is generally more difficult for a watch to track because of the increased tension on my arms and also because there's much more movement and bumpiness. I tested the Apple Watch Ultra 2 for a total of 20 bike rides on myself and 1 bike ride on Theresa. And here we actually start to see some more consistent differences between the Ultra 2 and the Series 9. And this is a similar overview to before, but now for biking outside and tested on me. And the points are a bit further away from the blue line now. Still, compared to many other watches, this is great, but there is a bit more deviation compared to what we saw for cycling indoors. And the correlation here is also slightly lower now at 0.98. But let's quickly jump to the individual rides to see why there's this deviation now. Now, looking at the individual bike rides, we see for the first time some somewhat bigger deviations between the Polar H10 and the Apple Watch Ultra. Compared to many other watches, these are minor deviations, but compared to what I've come to expect for many Apple Watches, this is slightly bigger than I'm used to. So we see, for instance, during this bike ride that some of the dips in my heart rate were not fully detected, similar to what we saw for cycling indoors, but also right here and right here, it had some delay in picking up an increase in my heart rate, and it also weirdly in the beginning here picked up on a peak in my heart rate. So the deviation right here is definitely a bit bigger than I'm used to. Some other bike rides look a lot better, like this one right here, for instance. Here there's a very good agreement between the Apple Watch Ultra and the Polar H10. And you can also see that right here in this bike ride, for instance, where there's generally a very good agreement. Still, there are some examples like this bike ride where we can see that the Apple Watch Ultra struggled a little bit. You can see that right here, this peak was missed, and the same goes for this peak and this peak right here. And generally, there are also some missing values right here. So during this part of the ride, the Apple Watch in general had trouble detecting a heart rate. So there's only a few points measured and these were wrong. And just to give you an impression of how the individual patterns of the Ultra 2 compare to the Series 9, here I put some side by side. So on the left are the bike rides recorded by the Ultra 2, and on the right the same bike rides but now recorded by the Apple Watch Series 9. So looking at the top left patterns right here for the Ultra Generation 2, you can see it struggled a bit here in the beginning and also here later in the ride. And this looked a lot better for the Series 9. And looking at the bottom plot, so on the left we have the Ultra 2, we can see that for some moments it struggled at the peaks of my heart rate, so right here, and right here, and the Series 9 didn't have these issues. So this is just to give you an idea of how sometimes the Series 9 did a bit better than the Ultra 2, but still the Ultra is pretty great as well. So overall this looks a bit worse than what we saw for the Series 9, but I'll get back to that in a second. Let's first look at Theresa's results. And also for Theresa, we see a bit more deviation compared to cycling indoors. In the higher heart rate range, almost all points are on or close to the blue line. Only right here in the medium to lower heart rate ranges, there are a bit more deviation. And we can see in our individual cycling session why this is. Now, Theresa actually only did a single bike ride with the Ultra 2, so we cannot draw any big conclusions, but generally we see somewhat similar patterns to what we saw for me. In the higher heart rate ranges, it's quite accurate, but there are some moments with some more deviation, and these are generally more in the lower heart rate range. You can see that, for instance, right here, but also right here, and also in the beginning right here. Next, let's again put these results into context by comparing them against many of the other watches I tested in the past. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. And of course, you would also make me really happy and it would help my efforts if you subscribe to this YouTube channel, like and comment this video. But of course, this is totally up to you. Now enough self-promotion, let's compare the Apple Watch Ultra 2 to the other watches out there. And this overview plot is structured similar to before, so the further to the right and the higher device is, the better its performance, with the Ultra 2 marked in red here. But again, those labels are kind of hard to read, even though we can see that the Ultra is amongst the better performing watches, but we're gonna zoom in so we can actually read the labels. And that overview is displayed right here. So these are just the watches now with a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And as you can see, for biking outside, out of the top 8 watches, 7 of them are Apple Watches. Only the Huawei Watch GT3 Pro comes in between. So all Apple Watches are doing really well. But what I find particularly interesting in this case is that the Apple Watch Ultra, both Generation 1 and Generation 2, are both doing a little bit worse than the Apple Watch Series 9 again, though the difference is a bit bigger in this case. And what is important to know is that out of all the other Apple Watches, the data for the Ultra Generation 1 is the freshest, so to say. So I retested that just before the Ultra Generation 2 and the Apple Watch Series 9 released. So it also used similar firmware to that of the Ultra Generation 2 and the Apple Watch Series 9. And we see that both the Generation 1 and Generation 2 of the Apple Watch Ultra do a tiny bit worse than the Apple Watch Series 9. And it does make sense to me that especially for biking outdoors, the weight of the Ultra is starting to play a role in its performance. Now it is only a minor minor difference in performance, but it could be a real difference. So it could be that the added weight of the Ultra makes it slightly less secure on the wrist and thereby decreasing the accuracy. Still, we should keep in mind that both the Generation 1 and Generation 2 of the Apple Watch Ultra are some of the top performers. Next, let's take a look at an exercise which is also something many of you are into, running. I was able to do 5 runs and Theresa did 2. And for running on me in this case, we see that all points are very close to the blue line again. The correlation is now 0.99, so lower than we saw for cycling indoors, but higher than we saw for cycling outdoors. And this makes some sense as the bumpiness and tension on my arm is likely less than for cycling outside, but definitely more than for cycling indoors. And the Apple Watch does seem to suffer a little bit. Still, overall, this looks very good, but let's take a look at those individual runs. Now, as I said, for running, the Apple Watch generally looked a bit better than for cycling outside, but here it struggled both in the dips and also sometimes in the peaks of my heart rate. You can see here in the beginning, it didn't fully detect these dips in heart rate, but also later on, it didn't detect all the peaks in my heart rate. For instance, right here, and right here. And that's more or less what we see for all runs. I won't show you all of them, but not all the peaks are detected and also not all the dips are detected. But if you want to see more on my website, I'll put all the runs. And for running, Theresa shows a similar agreement as I did, so the correlation is again 0.99, though for her, interestingly, there are some points below the blue line right here, so there are fewer points above it, but a few below it right here and right here. Now these are very minor deviations, but let's take a look at the individual runs, because this means it sometimes detected a too low heart rate. And it's interesting or good to see that Theresa shows similar patterns as I did. So not all the dips in heart rate are fully agreeing between the Polar H10 and the Apple Watch Ultra. Now the deviations are small, especially at the peaks of her heart rate. But during her second run, the Ultra struggled a bit more, and that's what you can see right here. So especially in the beginning of the run right here, we see that the Apple Watch missed a couple of measurements, so it only has a few measurements right here, and they're not that accurate. Later on, it does take more measurements, but it's not super precise. We can see quite a bit of deviation right here. Well, this is relative to what I'm used to for Apple Watches, so it's a bit bigger than I'm used to. And also right here, we see some deviation. Still, compared to many other watches, this isn't bad at all. It's just that for Apple standards, this is slightly worse than I'm used to. And for Theresa right here, likely the weight of the Apple Watch Ultra played a role. Next, let's take a look at another very difficult exercise for a watch to track, weightlifting. Now for weightlifting, it's not the movement per se that makes it hard to track your heart rate, but this exercise is more difficult because of the increased tension on my wrist and my arm, making it much harder for the watch to get a clean heart rate signal. So here you can see how the Apple Watch Ultra 2 performed on me for weightlifting, and this is a pretty good result. The correlation is 0.99, which is really high for weightlifting. Most watches really struggle here, and the Apple Watch is doing admirably well. But we need to look at those individual weightlifting sessions, because the main issue many watches have is that they miss the peak in your heart rate, and sometimes previous models of Apple Watches would just stop recording your heart rate in these moments, and we want to make sure this is not the case for the Apple Watch Ultra. So in an ideal world, there would never be any dropouts in heart rate and the Apple Watch would be very accurate. Let's take a look if this is the case or if there are some dropouts. So this is one weightlifting session I did with the Apple Watch Ultra, and this actually looks pretty good. So most of the peaks in my heart rate are detected, and this is what many watches struggle with. Only these first two right here of the second segment are not fully detected. Still, this looks pretty good. Most watches just flatline the moment I start doing a set. They just cannot detect those peaks in my heart rate, and for this set of exercises, the Apple Watch could. And that's what we generally see for the weightlifting sessions. Most peaks are at least partially or even fully detected, so this generally looks pretty good. And the agreement for Theresa is similar to mine, very good, with a correlation of 0.99, so that's not disappointing. But let's also take a quick look at her weightlifting sessions to see if any peaks were ever missed. And I'm happy to see that for weightlifting, the patterns on Theresa look the same as it did for me. Most of the peaks in heart rate are detected. In her case, some of the dips are not fully detected, but this looks pretty good still. And that's also more or less what we see for her second weightlifting session, though here the watch struggled a bit more, so not all the peaks are fully detected and also some dips in heart rate are not detected. Still, overall, compared to the competition, this is pretty decent. So again, in this overview, the watches are ordered from worst to best, so we want them to be to the top right. And as you can see, the generation 2 of the Ultra watch is doing really well in this case, but we need to zoom in to get a better view. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here with just the watches of a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And as you can see, the Ultra Generation 2 is a number 2 in this overview. So only the Apple Watch Series 9 is performing ever so slightly better, though I guess this is likely random variation. And all the other Apple Watches are again super close, though in this case there's a bit more distance between the Generation 1 of the Ultra and the Generation 2. Now I honestly find it quite unlikely there's a significant difference between Generation 1 and Generation 2, so it might not be a bad assumption to say that a distance of roughly 0.2 in correlation between two watches for weightlifting is in the range of noise. But I would say that all the top 7 watches, which are all Apple Watches, are doing quite well here. Now the only thing I've noticed, as I mentioned before, is that the latest generation of Apple Watches seem to have less dropouts at the peaks of my heart rate. So during weightlifting before, many Apple Watches would just stop recording my heart rate when I was doing a set of weightlifting. And now they mostly seem to continue recording. So there might be some small improvements in the firmware, but I suspect this will also be pushed to the older generation of watches. Now overall, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is still an amazing heart rate tracker, however it does seem to perform ever so slightly worse than the Series 9. Now this makes some sense of course, as the added weight of the Ultra 2 likely increases the movement of the watch on the wrist during certain exercises. Still, the differences are relatively minor, and Apple has generally developed the best heart rate sensor on the wrist, at least out of all the watches I've tested. Therefore, since the Apple Watch sensor is still the best performer out there, with potentially just a minor decrease in performance due to the weight of the Ultra 2, I would give the heart rate tracking 4.75 out of 5 stars, a quarter less than I gave to the Series 9. But let's now dive into a feature that is extremely important to me, sleep stage tracking. Now the Apple Watch tracks your 4 major sleep stages, that being light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, and the wake time if we count the latter as a sleep stage. Though as you know, Apple calls light sleep core sleep instead. I will compare the sleep stages as tracked by the Ultra 2 against the Z-Max EEG device, which can actually measure my brain waves. Now I won't go into detail since I already discussed this extensively in my Series 9 video, but the Z-Max likely overestimates my awake moment, so I'll just focus on deep sleep, REM sleep and light sleep in this review. And here you can see an overview of the sleep test results. Now on top are the sleep stages as recorded by the Z-Max EEG device, and on the left are the sleep stages as recorded by the Apple Watch. And each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Z-Max was predicted as each sleep stage by the Apple Watch Ultra. And if they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. Now, first of all, we see that about 93% of what was deep sleep according to the EEG device was also predicted as deep sleep by the Ultra 2, so that's pretty good. If there was any confusion, this was with light sleep at about 7%, but this is a really small amount of confusion. Now, looking at the individual nights will help us understand it even better, and here we see the first night I wanted to share with you. On top, we have the sleep stages according to the Z-Max EEG headband, with along the horizontal axis the clock time and my sleep stages on the vertical axis. And on the bottom, we have a similar plot, but now for the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Now here in purple, I highlighted the deep sleep as recorded by the Z-Max. And as you can see, there's generally a pretty good agreement with the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Only here they detect a bit of extra deep sleep, but overall this looks pretty good, I would say. And that's generally what we see for most nights. Most of the deep sleep recorded by the EEG device is also recorded by the Apple Watch Ultra, but sometimes it detects a little bit extra. But for instance, for this night right here, the agreement is almost perfect. So in terms of deep sleep, I'm very satisfied with the Ultra 2. However, one quick remark I should make is that the Z-Max tends to detect a lot of these short awake moments. You can see them all through the night. And I honestly think it's a bit too sensitive in detecting them, which is why I won't focus on the awake time for this analysis. And there's a final remark I should make. You might have noticed that for this night right here that we were just looking at, that the Apple Watch detected me as waking up quite a bit too early. So I did have some awake moment right here, as you can also see based on the Z-Max, so there was a bit of a longer awake moment, but after that the Apple Watch didn't detect me as falling back asleep again, while in reality I did. So I was actually still in bed from about 7 till 9:15 a.m. and the Apple Watch Ultra thought I was already awake, and this actually has quite a big influence on the percentages we were just looking at, so this is a bit of a weird night. Now, light sleep agreement was also pretty good at about 76%, and most confusion was with either REM sleep or awake time at about 9% and 11%. REM sleep agreement was also not bad at about 70%, and in this case most confusion was with light sleep and awake time. But as I just showed you, there was this one night where the Apple Watch detected me as waking up a couple of hours earlier than I actually did. So a lot of the light sleep and REM sleep I had later in the night was instead detected as awake time by the Apple Watch, but it's debatable whether these percentages actually reflect how the Apple Watch sleep staging performs, or if this one night now has a too big influence on these percentages. So let's also take a quick look at these percentages when we exclude that one night. And if we exclude that one night, the percentages look even a bit better. Now, deep sleep agreement is about the same, and this makes sense as most deep sleep is earlier in the night, so wasn't affected by this one deviating night. Light sleep agreement is even a bit better now at 80%, and most confusion is now with REM sleep and less with awake time. REM sleep agreement has also improved a little bit to 76% now, and also now there's less confusion with awake time, though still a significant percentage. But okay, I quickly wanted to show you these percentages. Let's switch back to the other one now. So these were the percentages we were just looking at, but let's now take a look at the individual nights for REM sleep. And if we look at the REM sleep as detected by the EEG device marked in red right here, we see a quite good agreement between the EEG device and the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Here, basically all of the REM sleep detected by the EEG device was predicted in the same way by the Ultra. The duration might have been slightly different, but overall this looks very good. And most nights look very good. Also, this night generally looks quite good. The Apple Watch detected a bit of extra REM sleep, and we have this awake moment right here, but we're going to ignore this for now. And overall, I would say I'm very happy with the performance of the Ultra 2. It's quite good at detecting REM sleep, and many watches struggle with this. And this also means that in many cases we can see most, if not all, of the sleep cycles. Now you go through roughly 4 to 6 sleep cycles each night, each one starting with light sleep and deep sleep marked here in blue, and each one ending in REM sleep marked here in red. And as you can see, I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 complete sleep cycles this night, and we will be able to see all of them based on just the data from the Ultra 2, so that's really good. Now, awake time detection on the surface doesn't look that great at about a 42% agreement. Though as we just saw, the Z-Max tends to detect a lot of these short awake moments, and the question is if these are really awake moments or if it's a bit too sensitive. So I don't want to focus on the awake time, but just for the complete picture, most confusion in this case is with light sleep. And this makes sense, of course, as light sleep is the closest sleep stage to being awake. Now, as I said, I don't want to focus on the awake time too much, but as you can see, generally there's a pretty decent agreement for the longer awake moments. So there were a few longer awake moments for this night, for instance right here, but also right here. And there's a decent agreement between the Ultra Generation 2 and the EEG device. These shorter ones often don't match, but the longer ones agree pretty okay-ish, I would say. And that's what we see about half of the time maybe. So also here there were some longer awake moments according to the EEG device, and some of them were also detected by the Apple Watch Ultra 2. But again, here I think that the EEG device is quite a bit too sensitive. And just to show you some percentages of the Ultra 2 and the Series 9 side by side, here I show you those results. So on the left is the Ultra 2 and the right the Series 9. And for the Ultra 2 I did exclude that one deviant night. But my main point here is that in general the Ultra 2 and the Series 9 perform about the same when it comes to sleep stage tracking. These percentages look super similar, so I expect that you get the same sleep tracking performance from either. That's honestly again some amazing sleep stage tracking by the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Now to show you how the Apple Watch Ultra 2 performs compared to other watches, let's put these results into perspective. And this graph shows you an overview of the agreement of different watches with different reference devices. Along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. Now, the better the agreement with a reference device, the more to the top right the device is. And this overview is slightly complicated because I've used different reference devices because of circumstances, but the general patterns are the same no matter what reference device was used. So the watches not marked in any color were tested against the Dream 2 EEG headband. The watches marked in green were tested against the Z-Max, so the same device we use today for the Ultra 2. And the watches marked in blue were tested against the polysomnography device, which is the gold standard in sleep stage tracking, so the most accurate reference. And the general patterns between the references are very similar. So the Apple watches are always doing best no matter what reference we're looking at. These are followed often by the Oura Ring, for instance, which always does a tiny bit worse. And for instance, Huawei watches are doing quite a bit worse. And if you look at the Dream 2, for which I have the most data, we indeed see Apple Watches are performing the best. Also, the H-Sleep Pod 3 is doing rather well. Other good devices include Oura rings, Whoop straps, several Fitbit devices, the Google Pixel Watch, but really the Apple Watches are doing best. And if we now plot the Apple Watch Ultra 2 in the same plot, either excluding that one weird night or keeping it in, we see that in both cases it performs very well. The average agreement is somewhere between 79 and 84, 83%, so that's very good. Now, as I said, I'm not focusing on awake time here, but just on light sleep, deep sleep and REM sleep. And as you can see, if we exclude that one night, it's super close to the Apple Watch Series 9. So I think in this case, both are using the same algorithm and both are doing very well. Overall, in all my testing, no matter how you put it, Apple Watches are some of the best sleep trackers out there, and the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is no exception. So the sleep stage tracking of the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is extremely good, and Apple in general is really the market leader when it comes to sleep stage tracking. Therefore, overall, I'd give the sleep stage tracking performance of the Apple Watch Ultra 2 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, it doesn't get 5 stars since even Apple can still improve a bit. Next, let's take a look at the GPS or location tracking, which the Ultra 2 is supposed to be better at than the Series 9 because the Ultra 2 has the precision dual frequency GPS. However, as you will see, I actually got some worse results for the Ultra 2 in some of my testing. And here you can see the results for 9 times I cycled to work, where the green markers indicate the moment that the watch connected the GPS signal, and I always started the watch right here on the corner without giving it any extra time to acquire the signal. So that means that the Ultra 2 acquired the signal really quickly, which is good, but we also want to see how consistent the track routes are, so let's zoom out a bit. So as you can see in the beginning, there's definitely some deviation between the signals. And as we move along, it does get better. Though for instance here we still have a bit of deviation, and we actually quite often near this radio station see some deviation. And if we now compare these signals to the Apple Watch Series 9 that I wore at the same time, we do see that the Series 9 looks a tiny bit better. I would say they are a bit more consistent here. But okay, getting back to the Ultra 2, if we go along the route, we do see some deviation, especially here there's some deviation. I'll zoom out a little bit. Then later on, I would say it's decently consistent, but still not perfect. And if we look right here, the results do get a bit better. So right here, I would say that the signals are pretty consistent. And in comparing it to the Series 9, I would say here that the Series 9 actually looks a tiny bit worse. So in this case, especially around the corner here, the Series 9, in my opinion, looks worse than the Ultra 2. So this is the Ultra 2, and this is the Series 9. So here I do think that the Ultra 2 actually does a little bit better. Then if we go further along the route, I do think that the Ultra 2 looks quite good. Here the results are quite consistent and the signals are quite close together. Now this is a relatively easy part for the watch to track because there's not a lot of buildings around, but still this generally looks quite good. And I think all the way till the end of my journey it looks quite good. There is a bit of deviation here, but also the Series 9 struggled here. So here we have the Series 9 for the same stretch, and as you can see, it also struggled here a bit. I do find it interesting that when we compare the two, the Ultra 2 is always shifted a bit compared to the Series 9. So we see all the signals of the Ultra 2 are here, and the ones from the Series 9 for some reason seem to be a bit shifted to the southwest. I'm not sure if this is a calibration thing, but generally for cycling to work, I think sometimes the Ultra 2 looked a bit better, and sometimes the Series 9. But let's now look at my route back from work, and this is where some weird things start happening. And here you can see the results for 9 times I cycled back from work, and I always started my route right here. So again, the signals are acquired really quickly and quite accurately, but the consistency is the thing I'm actually interested in. So let's zoom out a bit again. So during the beginning of this ride, it looks quite okay, I would say. There are some deviating signals. So let's quickly also look at how the Series 9 did here. So comparing the Series 9 here to the Ultra 2, I think in consistency they're relatively similar. They just shifted a bit again. I'm not sure what's going on here. But again, let's focus on the Ultra 2 right here and go along the route. So this generally looks quite good, and especially here it's super consistent, which is nice. So I'm not disappointed by that. I would say here there's a bit more deviation. I'm not sure what's going on here. I think this might even be a bit more than what we saw for the Series 9, but let's take a look. And indeed, comparing the Series 9 right here to the Ultra 2, I do think the consistency for the Series 9 looks better. And this is actually where the buildings start getting a bit taller. So this is where the Ultra 2 should be better, but it's actually the Series 9 right here, which looks a bit better than the Ultra 2. And then if we keep going along the route, I think the Ultra 2 shows quite some deviation. Also right here, it's not very consistent. And comparing that to the Series 9, I do think that the Series 9 looks a bit better here than the Ultra 2 does. There's a bit more deviation for the Ultra 2 compared to the Series 9. So this I find strange, that the Ultra 2 seems to be struggling more. Also right here near the roundabout, when we look at the Ultra 2 right here, this definitely looks worse than the Series 9. But okay, let's see if it continues like that. Here there's a bit of deviation. Then here it looks quite okay, I would say. But there's definitely quite some variation between the signals. And if we compare that to the Series 9 right here, which I used for the exact same 9 rides, it definitely looks better for the Series 9. Just compare the two. This is the Apple Watch Ultra 2. This is the Series 9, which is better. I definitely believe the Series 9 is doing better here. And also a bit further along the route right here, where there are again some taller-ish buildings, we see that the Ultra 2 shows quite some deviation. Then if you look at the Series 9 for the same part of the ride, I definitely think the Series 9 is looking better. I'm not sure what's going on here. The Ultra 2, which has the dual frequency precision GPS, seems to be doing a bit worse than the Series 9 right here, which has the normal one. So there's two conflicting theories in my head. The first is that some software updates still need to be applied to the Ultra 2 to improve its accuracy, and then in the long run it will be better than the Series 9. So it's just some firmware issue that will be solved at some point. Or, and this is actually contrary to what Apple says on their website, the Series 9 is actually piggybacking on the GPS signal of my phone. Now on Apple's website it explicitly says that this is no longer the case, that even if the phone is close, the GPS signal of the phone will not be used by the Apple Watch. So that's why I felt safe taking it with me. But in this case, the Ultra 2 was connected to a phone I left at home, and the Series 9 was connected to my main phone, which I had with me because I was listening to some podcasts. So I'm not sure if secretly and contrary to what it says on Apple's website, it was still connected to my phone's GPS somehow and improving the signal, or if for some reason indeed still the internal GPS of the Series 9 is doing better than the Ultra 2. It's something we will have to test in the future. I also recommend checking out some other reviewers like DC Rainmaker that also looked at this. So the GPS tracking performance of the Ultra 2 is still quite good, I would say, though for some reason it sometimes seems to perform more poorly than the Series 9. Now maybe it was a fluke or maybe just bad luck, but I do find it surprising. I also think that DC Rainmaker had some similar issues when he tested the Ultra 2 around some taller buildings, which would match my findings. Now don't get me wrong, the GPS tracking of the Ultra 2 is by no means bad. I'm just surprised that I didn't see any improvements compared to the Series 9 and potentially even a deterioration. Therefore overall, for now at least, I'd get the GPS tracking performance of the Ultra 2 between 3.5 and 4 out of 5 stars. Next, let's discuss a feature of the Ultra 2 that could help detect some sleep disorders, namely the oxygen saturation measurements. This could be helpful, for instance, in identifying conditions like sleep apnea, where breathing pauses cause reduced oxygen levels. Now, ideally, I test the Ultra 2 in a low oxygen environment, but that will only be possible in 2 weeks or so when I return to the Netherlands. Meanwhile, what I can check is if it ever detects a low oxygen level when it's not supposed to. So let's take a look. And as I said, the SpO2 test I did for the Apple Watch Ultra 2 was rather simple and very limited, but here you can see those results. I plotted the results for both the Series 9 and the Apple Watch Ultra 2, with the SpO2 values on the vertical axis and each dot being a single measurement right here. And as you can see, for both the Ultra 2 and the Series 9, most values were within my normal range, so between 95 and 100%. Below 95 is a relatively low SpO2 that I shouldn't have at ground level. And as you can see, a few times the Series 9 detected this and a few times more often the Ultra 2 detected this. Luckily, still most values are in my normal range. And I actually did some statistical testing to figure out if the Series 9 did significantly better than the Ultra 2. And luckily it didn't, so the distributions look more or less the same for both. So from this, I would conclude that in most cases, if you have a normal SpO2, both the Series 9 and Ultra 2 will indeed detect this. But in some cases, they might give you a false positive low measurement. So if you get 1 or 2 low measurements, there's nothing to worry about. This could be within the normal expected behavior of the Apple Watch. Just reposition it, take a few more measurements, and also a few moments later. So just treat it as a rough indication and not a real medical device. So luckily the Ultra 2's blood oxygen saturation measurements were generally within a normal range, with just a few quite low measurements. However, my final judgment will have to wait until I can test it in a low oxygen environment. Now, before giving you my final conclusions, there are definitely some limitations to my testing, which include a small sample size and potential inaccuracies of reference devices. Despite this, based on my results and reviews from other YouTubers like DC Rainmaker, Desvid, Chase the Summit, and Matt Legrand, Apple Watches are typically reliable heart rate trackers, although I do recommend checking out their reviews too. Also, bear in mind that firmware updates could still alter results in the future. Still, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is an amazing heart rate tracker, the sleep stage tracking is also the best out there, and the GPS tracking is pretty good it seems, though I'm surprised it isn't better. When it comes to the oxygen saturation, more testing is definitely needed, though it generally performs as expected. Therefore, I'd still rank the Ultra 2 amongst the best sports and health tracking devices, scoring between 4 to 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, if all of this got you excited and you want to see even more data that I didn't have time to show in this video, I'll upload it to my website, which is linked up here and down below. Now, all of that being said, even though the Apple Watch Ultra is generally amazingly accurate, I do have a few complaints. First of all, even though the battery life of the Ultra 2 is better than that of the Series 9, it's still quite bad compared to some of the competition. I do wonder if there's really no way that Apple can extend this a bit more. Second, even though it bears the Ultra name, I don't think that the Ultra 2 has shown to be more accurate than the Series 9 in my testing, which is a bit disappointing. Third, even though the health app and especially the fitness app look really beautiful, I do think they're not super functional. I would prefer getting all my health and sports statistics in a single app with clear explanations and advice. And this is where the Oura Ring and the Whoop strap do much better, and these are still my go-to devices when it comes to my daily health tracking. Now, what I think is a really cool development is that Whoop actually recently introduced a personalized ChatGPT-based AI coach that you can ask for advice based on your own data. I think this is super cool and likely where things are headed, with personalized, actionable advice that is put into context and explained. I still need to test this feature more, and I hope Apple will provide something like this in the future. But yes, that's my wish list for the Apple Watch. Who's the current Apple Watch Ultra 2 for? Well, honestly, the same people that the Ultra 1 was for. People who need a rugged watch with extra functionalities for more extreme outdoor sports activities. And you also get an extended battery life and a bigger screen. However, if you already own an Ultra 1, there's really no reason to upgrade. And if you don't mind charging your watch every day, the Series 9 will likely suffice for most people. And honestly, the Apple Watch SE is probably good enough too, which will save you a ton of money. Now, if your focus is more on general health and sports tracking and you don't need a smartwatch, the Apple Watch would honestly not be my first choice. Not because the data is not good enough, because Apple Watches are generally the most accurate, but because the data presentation of Apple just isn't the best at the moment. For this, as I said, I recommend the Oura Ring for just health tracking and the Whoop strap if you also want to track your sports activities. If you want the best GPS tracking, Garmin has got you covered, and if your budget is a bit more tight, Coros would also be a cheaper alternative for good GPS tracking. Finally, if you want great sleep tracking and additionally want to actively improve your sleep quality, I would get an ASleepPod 3. And if you want to know why I advise these things, check out this video right here on what devices I use myself. And you might also be interested in my review right here of the Apple Watch Series 9. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video.